Hey Patreon viewers, I've just filmed a video for the public channel talking about steel quality and how it affects blade design. I've been using this longsword primarily as an example and this small sword. And just to summarise, I mean you'll see the video when it goes up, but just to summarise, I'm essentially in a far too long-winded way trying to explain why medieval sword designs are dictated partly by the material available to medieval Europeans, and that's true of anywhere in the world, of course. You know, if you have a crucible steel available to you, quite simply, you can make a different type of blade than if you only have bloomery steel available to you, and that is a huge, never underestimate what a huge difference it made all over the world, but particularly in Europe. As far as the things that I study, of course, what a huge difference it made to blade design. And one of the reasons why we see such a rapid change in blade design between, well, through the 16th and 17th centuries, you know, if you think about it, at the end of the 15th century, you know what swords look like. They look like medieval swords. And then we go through the 16th and 17th century, and by the end of the 17th century, we've literally got small swords. So consider, when we're talking history over hundreds of years, swords changed an awful lot, and it wasn't only to do with changes in warfare, it was to do with changes in what they could do with the material. And as I hope I've shown in some of my cutting videos, and I've explained verbally as well, is that sabres can cut as well as medieval arming swords, despite the fact that they're lighter and narrower. So you'd go, well, why is a medieval arming sword so kind of chunky then? Well, part of the answer, not the only answer, but part of the answer is to do with the fact that they had to make them certain shapes and certain chunkiness because of the materials that they were using. Right, but that being said, I actually wanted to make a different point to you guys, which is a brief point really, but I thought that would fit quite well in a Patreon video, so here it is. And I have mentioned this before, but notice this is a relatively typical type of longsword, as would have been carried at the end of the 14th century. So this is the sort of thing that might have been carried in the Battle of Poitiers, right the way through the Condottieri Wars in Italy. This is the type of sword that Fiore would have used, and this is the type of sword that would have been carried at Agincourt as well. So it's a relatively typical longsword of around either side of the year 1400, but more the late 1300s and into the early bit of the 1400s, I would say. Not to say that this disappeared, but this particular shape is typically late 14th, early 15th century. And what's interesting is people often think that longswords look impressive, don't they? They're big, partly because of the wide crossguard, partly because of the broad base of the blade, relatively speaking to other swords, the longer grip, the fact you grip it two-handed, this kind of thing. And they're a little bit longer in the blade because, of course, you've got a two-handed grip which can balance it better, and you've got two hands on it a lot of the time. So they look impressive, powerful swords. But actually, and for some reason, medievalists, people who study medieval sources and medieval weapons, think of later period swords. I'll just grab this Grenadier Guards officer's sabre as somehow dainty or less than these longswords. Well, in a sense they are. They are lighter, they are definitely lighter, but part of the reason they're lighter is the materials. The steel that was available to Victorian sword makers was cast steel. It's essentially a modern steel, which had been factory produced with the correct amount of carbon and everything else put into it. Medieval steel was made by the bloomery process and was full of slag. So it was a much less reliable material, and not only did it have inclusions in it, all medieval steel has inclusions in it, but because of the inclusions it meant the heat treatment was less reliable as well. It was just a much less consistent and understood material. But the point I want to make to you guys is the centre of percussion of this longsword, despite the fact it looks like a big powerful sword, is around where the fuller ends, about there. And actually, if you compare the width of the blades between the Victorian officer's sabre and the longsword, they're about the same. And not only are they about the same, they're the same cross section as well. So I just kind of think it's funny that particularly medieval HEMA people, I think they've watched too much Conan, have a tendency of assuming, if we just look at the ends of the blade, have a tendency to assume that medieval swords are somehow more manly or more powerful than Victorian sabres. Oh, the Victorians, they were kind of effete and, gentle and blah, blah, blah. It's just a load of rubbish. It says more about Hollywood and our modern perceptions of history than actual history. And if we look at these two weapons, in fact, now I'm looking at them side by side, the sabre is wider. Okay, so despite the fact that this is not a particularly big or beefy officer's sabre from the 19th century, it actually, at the centre of percussion, the bit you're cutting with, has a broader blade than the longsword and the same cross-section. It's just a flattened diamond cross-section. And obviously they can both be equally sharp. They're both bits of steel. But if this was an actual 14th century longsword, and this is an actual 19th century sabre, this is almost always, well, basically 99% of the time, going to be better quality steel and better heat treated than the longsword is, because the longsword's going to have slag inclusions, it's going to have a lower hardness at the edge, usually about 40-45 Rockwell at the edge. These are more like 50-55. So these are harder at the edge. These have got lots of inclusions in the blade, and that heat treatment is going to be therefore correspondingly more variable. So, to finish up, I don't know where to put my sword down now. To finish up, just to say really that, medieval swords are great. I love them and they look beautiful. They're such an aesthetically pleasing shape. This is Dynasty Forge's bastard sword, incidentally. But they are not the, massive Conan swords. They're not the big powerful things that people think they are. And in cutting, the only reason that long swords perform better than sabres is because they're two-handed. If you compare medieval arming swords with 19th century sabres or 18th century back swords, they're all pretty similar. Some of them perform better than others, but they're surprisingly similar. And just because something has a beefy blade at the base, don't think that therefore it's going to hit with a lot of force up here, because you're hitting the person with this part of the blade, not with this part of the blade. Anyway, Happy New Year tonight. I'm uploading this video, I think I hope I've got the day right. Yes, it's New Year's Eve tonight. So I hope you are having a great New Year's Eve, whether it's spent alone, chilling out with a movie, playing some games, or whether you're having a massive party. I hope you have a great time. I'm going to see you obviously in 2019, unless something really bad happens tonight. I've got a few friends coming over for some games. We've got various games, so I don't know what we're going to be playing yet, but some of the people coming over, in fact, you will probably know from some of my videos, Pedro and various other people that are coming over, Jack and stuff. So we're going to have a nice evening, not a huge group of people, small group of people, have a bit of fun, have some games, have a few drinks, eat some pizza, have a nice time. I hope you're having a lovely time. Say hi below, chat to you soon, and I'll see you really soon in the new year, which is tomorrow, for some more videos. Cheers for watching, folks, and thanks for all your support as always. Cheers.